mouth is when I'm ocean waves.
Today on Nova Legends podcast, I have Coach Brian Wiese from Georgetown University. He's the men's coach and recently concluded another successful season. Coach, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, I've talked to a lot of coaches, soccer coaches, college coaches the last month or two. I tried to do all the final eight, final four in the men's and women's, especially Division III, but I've done some Division I college coaches as well. And one thing I would think, this would be a kind of a nice time of year for you, especially now that the World Cup is on. Are you enjoying your off season?
Yeah. It's a funny time with the World Cup, right? Usually it's a summer event and you spend your summers doing it. So it's certainly a different kind of thing for us. But it gave me, we lost in the second round of the NCAA tournament, which was the week before Thanksgiving. So that was right at the beginning of the World Cup. So that gave me a couple things to manage in terms of I could spend my time watching some games and get my mind off it very quickly. So that was good. And it's been a fun World Cup. So it's been fun watching the games. Yeah.
Well, we'll get back to the World Cup because I'd love to hear your thoughts, but briefly, just to go through your record, you just completed your 17th year at Georgetown. I believe you've been to the NCAA's 11 of the last 12 years. You were a National Coach of the Year 2012. You 32 players have signed MLS deals, which I find incredible. You played at Dartmouth College. You were goalkeeper, MVP of the team, captain. Seems like a lot of goalies end up becoming coaches. Maybe they like to talk. They like to talk a lot when they're.
They like to talk. That's right. You spend a lot of time thinking about the game back there without doing a lot. That's right.
Yeah. And one thing I see, you're a mechanical engineer from Stanford Masters, and it's crazy how well educated all these college soccer coaches are. You guys have incredible pedigree.
Well, there's a few different ways of thinking about that, right? Like I spent a lot of time and money getting a master's degree and ended up not doing a whole lot with it from an engineering point of view. It's at the end of the day, if you're a college soccer coach, you love being around this element of the game, right? It's a different kind of thing than being a pro coach or a youth, club coach. And, it's a very unique kind of cycle of players when they come in, come out, but it's a really wonderfully formative time in their lives. And it's fun, navigating that process with each class as they come through, right? They come in very young and in some ways immature sometimes in this, and they just need some time, right? And then by the time they leave, they're men and they're leaders, and it's just fun to see that metamorphosis happen. And so a lot of times, listen, I've just been around it. You get a master's degree, and I was actually coaching while I was doing that, so I was around it, the game of that, and it's just it's a in being in that environment, maybe that's why we get educated, because you're just in there, you might as well get something done while you're at the school doing it anyway.
Exactly. And you have to coach these brilliant students, but when you look at Coach Wiese and Coach Nolan, the women's coach, you guys got master's degrees too, so they can't look down upon the education of their coaches.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if either of us are making heavy use of what we learned in the classroom for those master's degrees, but we can say we have it, right? We can say we've got that done. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the World Cup a little bit, and a lot of the college coaches I've talked to, they've been doing it for a long time. It seems like a job that they all really like, and a lot of them been at the same institution for a long time as well. But when you look at the international game, and then when you look at the pro game, or you're a high-level club coach as well, what is it about the college game that you enjoy? Not just the lifestyle, because I know it's a crazy fall. You're always recruiting and stuff, but about the actual game itself on the field.
Well, the college game's got some unique features, which if you're a purist, some people don't like the subbing patterns. They don't like how overtime is handled, and it's changing a lot. It's evolving with the game as well. The rules change as they go through it. But the game, I'm sort of on the fence on some things. You understand the good and the bad of all this stuff, right? So, for instance, the subbing rules allow for you to do a lot of subbing, right? If you want, you can do a ton. When we won the national championship in 2019, we used a lot of players. We had a very, very deep team, and we made use of that. But it built the culture of the players. Like there was a very cohesive group. People get opportunities to play that maybe wouldn't normally in the international game subbing rules or even the youth subbing rules. Sometimes are a little more restricted developmentally. So, but I would actually like to see a little bit less subbing in it, but I also I don't want to get it down to sort of what FIFA has when you watch the World Cup, right? They have a very limited number of subs and limited number of windows that you can sub. And just purely because you get the opportunity for people to play that maybe wouldn't in certain games, right? You might have games where you're winning comfortably and you can put guys on comfortably to do that. But the tempo of the college game is very high, right? There's a flow to it that's a little different than maybe some other games in terms of how the rules are put in place, and it's quite enjoyable. I think you get some energy and action over the 90 minutes that I think maybe you don't get when you don't have the opportunity to take a player off for 10 minutes to let them get their legs back and do some things. So there's some differences there, which I don't think are necessarily terrible. That adds some panache to it in some ways. But they just made a change. I mean, they just got rid of overtime for the regular season. There's a lot more ties in the college game this year. And I actually think we're missing something with they used to have overtime and it used to be golden goal. So you score a goal and the game ends. And that's a very unique feature that actually I thought made college soccer very, very exciting to watch. And led to some very remarkable fun moments and games too. So I'd be interested to see. I think the general consensus of coaches that I've been around and talked to is that they kind of the overtime, the reason to put it in was to sort of protect legs of players and do this. But when you have, the liberal subbing policies that we have and rosters of 25 to 30 kids or more in some cases, it's up to you as a coach to do what you want to do, but you have plenty of options to rest a kid if they get tired. So, I think a lot of people would actually like to see that come back again, just because of the element that gave college soccer. That was a lot of fun. So, but I think that the fun thing for me again is the growth of a team, but also just the growth of a player, and seeing how they develop and evolve and mature. And I think back to all the really good players that we've had, the guys who have gone on to be national players of the year or candidates for that, or gone on to be pros, or that list of 30 some odd pros that we've had. They're remarkably different players and people as freshmen than they were as seniors. And for as good as they were as seniors, a lot of times you think back to where they were as freshmen and be like, boy, they've really done a heck of a job to develop their game and get to a level where they can maybe play beyond college. So that for me is really the fun part of watching a season unfold, let alone a 4-year career. But we're also forced into we can't keep hold on to guys. So some people are trying with these COVID rules to keep guys for 5 or 6 years, which is an interesting sort of phenomenon that's still ongoing. But no matter how good a player is, you can't hang on to him for really more than 4 years. So you have this natural cycle of an evolution where teams sort of grow and come in and they come out, and it's a natural curve of that. And managing the influx of fresh players and the inevitable exodus of your experienced top end guys is sort of a fun challenge that you get to do every year.
Yeah. Well, Coach, there's a much higher awareness of pro soccer, especially European soccer, than it was when you first started coaching. I mean, it's on network now. Everyone has a Premier League team. We know much more about, even casual sports fans know about pro soccer now. It wasn't always like that. Has college soccer, and particularly a top level program like Georgetown, has it changed as a stepping stone to pro? Is it a different thought process for top prospects now, whether I go to Georgetown or do I go overseas and try to get into a pro academy, or maybe try to get into an MLS academy in America?
Yeah, it's a really interesting time right now. We're the MLS pathway for the domestic leagues is growing in that they've built more and more avenues for players to come and play professionally in a developmental cycle. So most of the MLS teams now, and I think all of them are tasked to have in effect a farm league team, like a MLS2 team, they call them a lot of times, right? And right now there's a lot of pressure from kids who are in those systems as youth players to the ones that we're interested in, that we think are going to help us, are also the ones that the club wants to maybe sign and put them into their system to develop. And so there's a real nip and tuck with what's the best place for kids to go, developmentally, just, not just for their soccer, but as people, and long term. And from my seat being at Georgetown, I'm very, very skeptical of the number of kids that are bypassing college right now, to go and try to make it into their pro teams, and they're being strongly encouraged by the MLS clubs to go into their system. And from the MLS club's point of view, it means that they have control over the development. If they're doing well, they can train with the first team. They can do, and those opportunities are all real and right. But the challenge is the sheer numbers of kids who don't really make it how they were hoping to make it. And then the bypass in education is becoming a little bit more of a problem, to be honest with you. I'm curious to see how it's going to sort of unfold, right? Because right now there's a lot of kids who are choosing not to go to college to sort of fill these sort of spaces that the MLS clubs need. There's not a huge number who are going to Europe. Europe still happens, but there's a lot of things that have to go right. Passport issues, work permit issues, all those things have to sort of fill in and go right. Most kids are trying to sort of make it domestically in a USL team or an MLS team. And but the percentages of the ones that actually make it and do it are still astronomically low for my opinion, the risk reward of giving up a college education along the way. And the pathways through college are still very real and still very relevant for top end players. And so there's some players who aren't ready to sort of get into the pro environment, and they'll use college to develop, and the late bloomers is really good. But then there's other kids who are ready, but so much has to go right, for these kids to make it, that for me, the risk reward of those kids to say, hey, I'm not going to go to if you got a really good head on your shoulders, I'm not going to go to Stanford, I'm not going to go to Notre Dame, I'm not going to go to Duke, I'm not going to go to Georgetown, I'm not going to go to a Penn, or Cornell had a great team this year. Those two teams are fantastic, right? It doesn't really make sense to me for that at all. And then for other kids who maybe would have trouble getting into one of these schools, going to the some of these teams that were just playing in the College Cup, Indiana, Syracuse, Creighton, Pitt, those teams are great teams, and they develop players, and it's a really viable pathway. And I do worry a lot about the trend of the U.S. Player and the U.S. system of putting kids into a system, right, and having education not really be a part of that, is very European. And what I think you would find is that if you talk to a European club or people who are in their youth systems, they would say that their system needs to emulate the U.S. system. They're saying their system is broken. It's a real problem. The number of kids that they signed at 16 to see if they can make it, and by 18, 19, 20 are out and have nowhere to go and have no education, nothing else to fall back on, is a real number. And I think ethically, a lot of those clubs have an issue with what they're doing. And they would say they want to be more like the U.S. And of course, the U.S. is like, well, we need to be more like Europe. We need to develop our players. We need to grow our leagues. And so we're trying to slide into the European model. And we think we should be a little more like Europe. And the Europeans think that they've got it wrong, and they should be more like the U.S. So it's a very interesting a challenge that I think, philosophically, that I think we have to get our heads around a little bit better as a country to how to make the best of what we have educationally for these kids, and obviously try to build the game and get better and better players out of it too.
It reminds me of a story. So there was a company called Dutch Soccer School. They're still here, and they put these great summer camps on, and my kid went, and we became friends with one of the counselors there, and he was Dutch. And when we were over there, my son played over there, trained over there a little bit. His team did, and we got to know him really well. And we asked him why did he decide to become a pro player, and at the time my son was a 15, 16-year-old player, very, very impressionable. And he said, do you know how many players there are in Holland? He said, I was a great player. And he went all the way through the academy system. And he was briefly in the Ajax system as well. And then he said, not only are there so many players, there's so many coaches over here. You can't even make a living coaching because there's so many people in Holland, great players, coaches, that work for very cheap. So I never thought of it that way, and that they want to emulate our system because in America, our athletes leverage their athletic ability to get education.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's right. That's real.
Yeah. So would you say the same thing for your daughter? I think your daughter's Morgan, who's at Princeton. Is it the same for is the same thought process for a woman player as it is for a male player?
Yeah, well, yes and no. I think it's interesting that you do see more and more top women's college players foregoing a year or 2 or 3 years of college to sign a pro contract. So you're seeing the women's game is growing, the professional game is growing in a really healthy way. But the volume of opportunity just isn't there, right? There's a lot more women's players. There's 200, just over 200 men's Division I programs. There's 350 or 70. So there's a huge number more of women's Division I programs. So the volume of players out there that really feed into college. I do think that the college pathway for the women is very, very much still the way the top kids go. But I think one of the top players, I've heard I think Duke had a player who decided to forego the last 2 years of college to sign to become a pro athlete. And it's much more rare, but it's starting to get percolate up a little bit that direction. But I don't foresee that changing institutionally the same way it's been for the men's side with MLS and the pressures, and that, to be honest, the pressures that a 16-year-old boy faces that's at the ability to go either direction are wildly different than what the women are dealing with right now.
Yeah. Well, so I interviewed Craig Escherich, former Georgetown player and coach, basketball player and coach. And he reminded me, because I had forgotten this, that when he went to Georgetown was a regional school. It didn't have quite the national name yet. And one thing he talked about was the basketball team helped to elevate Georgetown's brand. And it's just more well known. And it helped all elements of the school. What has it meant as a soccer coach? Has Georgetown, I mean, you've done incredibly well and you've won a national championship. Has Georgetown's name identification with basketball, has that been a positive or a negative, or is elements of both in there?
Well, I think there's absolutely no question that Georgetown, the brand of Georgetown, is founded on the success of the basketball team. Certainly, those 1980s was just listen, I remember being a 10-year-old watching ESPN in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I'm from.
Really?
Watching the Big East play, and in 1983, 1984, the window, and just being blown away by what the league was, but certainly Georgetown was just this awe-inspiring sort of juggernaut of a group of personalities and players and teams. And boy, you're sitting there and you're watching and you're saying, well, what is this team? Like, you never heard of it before. I'm in New Mexico, you're trying to learn this and the other, about the Lobos, this, but you find out about and start understanding, well, what is Georgetown, right? And the league was great at that time. Like, oh, St. John's, what the heck's that? Like, if you're 10, you're trying to learn all these things, and those impressions and imprints become a national thing. And I think the history that we have as a basketball school is something we certainly lean on quite a bit, and it is a national brand, right? So I think our successes in the last 10 years as a soccer program, and our women's, Dave Nolan's successes in the last 10 years have really followed lockstep with each other, has helped us in the soccer circles to be a national brand in the in the West Coast and the Midwest and South, whatever. People are very aware of us, but we still very much get our successes from what I call the 95 corridor as a recruiting, geography, the anywhere from like Virginia all the way up to Boston, right? That 95 corridor, I-95 corridor. We don't have to work hard at all to educate people what Georgetown is, right? That the families that are up in Philly and New Jersey and New York and Connecticut, they all very much understand, what Georgetown is, and it's a much easier recruiting sell when we're in that little corridor than maybe when we're in California or Seattle or something like that. But we have the ability to have conversations with pretty much anybody now.
Well, in terms of Division One type of culture, the DC area is a little bit different in that there are lots of Division One programs, soccer programs around here. You know, with American, we have Howard, UVA is close, University of Maryland, and we have great Division Three programs, Hopkins and Catholic. There are some states with only one or two Division One schools. Do you prefer the culture of DC, where you have lots of activity, lots of great programs of which to play and to compete with?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the successes of our region are remarkable, and I think the ability to play Maryland, right, and play Virginia, Americans on the rise, like they've done, and Howard and Americans history has pretty impressive history. Hopkins, Catholic are doing unbelievably well in the D3 ranks these days. And so
I forgot Navy played well.
Navy made the NCAA tournament. We played them in the NCAA tournament. Like it's wonderful, right? And so having those things, first of all, makes scheduling nice because you got easy games you have to drive a long way to play. But we're all such wonderfully different types of schools, and so it's yes, you recruit against Maryland, yes, we recruit against Virginia, American, we recruit against all those schools, but we're just so different from each other that it filters out into a way that usually works out pretty well for everybody. Everybody finds their niche of a kid, and but I think it's great to have an area that's soccer rich, where you can maybe develop some rivalries. You have, we played Virginia in the NCAA final, right? When we play Maryland, it's sold out, at our place or their place, and these are just great. These are great building blocks for soccer in the area. And I think the better we are collectively as schools, the more interest that the college game gets.
Yeah. Well, speaking of hotbeds, what was it like growing up and playing soccer in Albuquerque? You must have been, you must have stood out there.
I appreciate the fact that you've done your research. You know that New Mexico is a hotbed. So no, it was a unique place to grow up. It's a basketball state. Like the University of New Mexico has a history of a passionate basketball following. But soccer actually has a nice foothold there. We actually go out every year and do a satellite camp in Albuquerque, because the University of New Mexico, which by the way used to have a wonderful soccer team, that unfortunately the university made a decision to drop men's soccer a few years back. Despite the fact they're a top 10 team, they made the College Cup a few times. They're a very, very good program, and it kind of makes sense. I mean, there's a foundation of good players locally, weirdly, right, for the population. But we go out there just to see, hey, there's good players there, and so we want to see who they are, and if they don't have a local hometown team to play for anymore in state. So, but I really got my foot in the game following my brother around. He was 4 years older than me, and he was a part of a team that was this wonderful sort of anomaly of a team that had unbelievable success, against some of the top teams in the country, and he had a group of players that ended up going. Two players went to UCLA. A whole bunch of players went to UNM, Dartmouth, Richmond. They had an inordinate number of Division I players on the team for that state. And then, strangely, my year, 4 years younger, had another team that's very similar, and nothing really between. We could as 12-year-olds, we could play against 14, 15-year-old, the best teams of U14, 15 and win pretty comfortably. But my team had another thing where we had sort of this odd collection of very talented players that a lot of them played Division I, and so I got really lucky with that, right? I got sort of born lucky with following an older brother that kind of got me into the game, and you play, and as a younger brother, that helps hugely. But then, being able to be a part of a group of players that sort of happened to be born in the same year, that we all sort of grew our love of the game, and we're really competitive. We loved going out of state and California and beating teams from California, right? And or Texas or Colorado or wherever the case may be. So we got quite lucky with that. But yeah, it was at that time, that was an anomaly. That wasn't the status quo.
if you're recruiting kids, even today, and my guess is the gap is narrowed, but if you like a kid, let's say from the DC area, Bethesda is the club, and you have a kid from New Mexico, also a great player. Are you going to take into consideration that the local kid may have more opportunities here, may have had better coaching, more technical training, or is that gap narrowed in that you don't worry about that and you just take the best player that you can get?
Yeah, it's holistic, right? You take the best player and the best kid, like who's the right fit, who's got the right personality, what's their mentality, are they intrinsically motivated, right? Like that really matters. I don't think we'll look at it and say, oh, hey, we found a local kid, we want to get the local kids versus otherwise. A lot of it's just out of necessity. We don't have any internationals on our team really right now.
Is that right? Wow.
Which is an anomaly for college soccer. There's a huge percentage of Division I players are international, huge percentage. But that's not because we don't like internationals. It's just that we get a lot of success and traction from US based kids, and the finances, the need-based financial aid from Georgetown is much more conducive for a US citizen than it is for an international. And but we just get to know the kids a lot better, so the reason why we'll take local kids, and we have a handful of players from the Bethesda club, right, which is right up the road from us, and have had some success. I think we have one every year almost and we have one coming in next year. And so that's been a really nice sort of relationship we have, but it's not because we feel like we have to take a kid from Bethesda, but we just get to know those kids really well. And you just feel much more comfortable when you know somebody and you've seen them enough. So, as you radiate out from DC, you maybe see players less and less, and unless you get really lucky and are at events where you can see a bunch of kids from Seattle. So we have a kid coming from Seattle next year. Wonderful player, but we saw him. He came to our camp. We saw him play with his club team multiple times, and so we saw him enough. We feel really comfortable with him. But the reality is you might see a kid from a team from Seattle once or not at all. They may be great fits for you, but you just don't know. You just don't feel like you have a good handle on it. So recruiting we'll take anybody from anywhere if we get to know them well enough, if you think they're the right kid.
Yeah. Well, you had a great career at Dartmouth yourself. Did you go to Dartmouth knowing you were going to play soccer, or did you were a good player and Dartmouth was a great institution and you happened to play?
No, I got very lucky because I had a lot of injuries in high school. I had some knee surgeries and I have a knee replacement now because of all those back then. I had all this with arthritis as a fairly young for a knee replacement, but I was a mess. I was a mess in high school. So I was actually tracking quite well as a younger player. And then I picked up some injuries, which really put me out of the game for 2 years when I was in high school. And then I got healthy just in time for maybe my senior spring, to do some camps. And the reality is I went to Dartmouth. The coach there was a fellow named Bobby Clark, who's a Scotsman, who's really, he's retired now, unfortunately, but was just a wonderful mentor for me to play for. And then I coached with them as an assistant for 10 years. And the reason why I think he took me to Dartmouth is I was tracking back into form and did a camp, and he liked, I was a goalkeeper, so he liked what he saw for that and needed a goalie, and so he recruited me there. But I think the real in I had was that my brother also played for him, was on the team at that time too. So he knew him and he knew the family, and I think that gave me the benefit of the doubt to come in there. But the ability to play for someone like that who we knew well, and he was just going to be a fantastic person to play for, and to be able to do it at a place like Dartmouth, which is a great school to be at, was incredibly lucky for me. It just sort of happened to fall into place.
What were some of the aspects about the game that you learned from Coach Clark that you still use today?
Well, he's a teacher, right? So he, it's how he. How he thinks about the game is very, it's a way of, it's an uncomplicated thing, right? But the way he taught it was, I think, the way you really kind of that the things I learned from him as a coach, and learning from him. Playing for him was like this magical thing, right? We got the team good, and we all were excited about it. We all played hard and played for each other, and sort of set the culture in place that was really wonderful, which is one of the real keys for him. But he taught in a way that I would say is a very simple way, right? And it wasn't an overcomplicated sort of method of how you do things and why you do things. But he had a lesson plan for every session, very thought out, how he was going to do what he wanted to do, why he wanted to do it, and he'd revisit it, right? So I as a coach, I sort of use the guideline of, if you want to see something on the field from your team, if you don't talk about it once every 2 weeks, right? If you let it go beyond maybe a 2-week window, you really can't hold the guys accountable for doing it very well. And so you have to make some real decisions with, like, what is it you want to be good at, and make sure you keep reinforcing that on a very consistent level. And you can obviously change how you do it, and whether those themes you want to make sure that you're touching on. And so that's kind of limiting to what you can do. At some point, you have to make some decisions. Well, do we revisit that? It's been maybe a week and a half or 2 weeks. We need to revisit how we're going to press a group defensively. And if we make a decision, we're going to work on something else. You have to start making decisions. Well, what is it you want your team to be known for? And that kind of messaging, I think, is something he did a wonderful job at. The guys really understood their jobs, their roles, how they fit. And for me, that was you don't really think about it at the time. You're sort of in it and you do it. But then when you become the head coach and that really sort of solidifies in your thinking about, well, how do I want to get across the messaging of who we are going to be, right? And it's really not a complicated message. You just have to be really resilient and diligent with how you present it, so that it starts becoming built into the fabric of the DNA of the players and the team. And he was really wonderful at that.
Well, Georgetown is known as playing very attractive soccer, possession based. People love watching your teams play. Was that important to Coach Clark as well? The method of play.
Method of play was very important. We're different. Like he's evolved as a coach over his time, and even as head coaches, and he was very renowned for a defensive, really organized defensive team that did this and that played well. On top of that, we're a little different philosophically in that regard, right? So I think we would overpass, according to Coach Clark, probably, right? We'd probably try to play a little bit too much in some of the some sketchy areas on the field, et cetera. But I have a very clear idea of sort of how I want our team to look and play, and a lot of that is some things with the ball that are different from how he did it. But I think that's what every coach is. Every coach has some things that they gravitate towards instinctually, right? And I have some things that I know when we're not doing it really well, I start getting aggravated. So if you're aware of that, you can sort of address that. And so, but you naturally become something that you're comfortable with, right? You might be really comfortable defending and being a sit and counter team, or you might be more comfortable in possession. And you have to be aware of that, but then also be pragmatic with how you're going to get results doing that. So we're probably a little more possession based than my old boss was, but there's a lot of the same themes and DNA, and a lot of the same sessions. Like, there's a lot of things that we do that are exactly the same as what we did with him back in 1999, right? And some of that stuff just hasn't changed at all, and just like it too much. But that's the fun of it.
Well, actually, I mean, obviously you had a great apprenticeship under Coach Clark. Was it a smooth transition to be a head coach? Were there difficult lessons to learn and that you may not have expected when all of a sudden you're in charge?
Oh yeah, very difficult, right? Yeah, it's it was humbling. It's humbling. It really is humbling. I mean, I think Bobby Clark went to Dartmouth in the 80s and took a team that was bottom of the Ivy League every year, and within a couple of years won the league, right? He went to Stanford and took a team that was like 5-12 in consecutive seasons, and within 2 years got up to number 2 in the country and into the NCAA tournament, right? And went to Notre Dame, and then within 1 year into the NCAA tournament for a team that hadn't been in it for a little while. And so, I was around all three of those experiences, and I'm like, well, that's not that hard. You can just do it. And I got to Georgetown, and boy, it was not the same, right? So whatever the special sauce was that he had, he didn't give it to me. He didn't let me have any when I left. And the first few years at Georgetown were very, very hard. I mean, enjoyable. I loved it. But in terms of success and trying to solve it and trying to get yourself to where you think you can get to, it took time and took more time than I was really happy with. But I think there were some factors to that were in place that were different here than maybe the other places that I had been. But also it's just hard. I wasn't as good at it as he was, so very humbling. Yeah, very humbling, very hard. I think there's a lot of alums who were not, the first couple of years at Georgetown, we had losing seasons, losing records. And there's a lot of alums who weren't happy that they had hired this young coach who didn't really know how to do anything, who had no Georgetown ties. Right. So I had to really kind of put my head down and grind away for a while and just, believe in what I was trying to do and try to get the right kids. And I was really lucky. I had a great staff of coaches with me, from day one. And a lot of people I learned from, as much as, as assistants, you learn a lot from your assistants as a head coach, as much as you hopefully pass on to them. But I got really lucky with that. And I had a really good group of core group of people that were committed to trying to get it right. But it took time. It took a lot of time. I think 06 was my first year. I think 08 was the first winning year, but we didn't qualify for the NCAA tournament. Same in 09. I think 2010 was the first year we made the NCAA tournament. So it was a fifth season where you're like, okay, we hit a benchmark we were trying to hit. And it was hard, that was hard. So, but we've been really lucky with that. We've been able to pretty much maintain that standard. And that's a tribute to, I have a really smart group of people working with me as coaches, and I have a lot of kids who are really motivated to be good. And those two combinations tend to help you get the results you want to get.
Do most of your teams play the same, or does it depend on the talent that you happen to have in a particular season?
It changed, you evolve to what you have, right? I mean, the shape changes in how we play and but philosophically, I think it's not too different. Even from the 06 team, 07 teams, like those guys on those teams could come into our current team and not really miss a beat about, in terms of what they're trying to do and the jobs that they're asked to do. And I think you take what you can take, like we're much, much more possession based because we have some better players that can do it over the last, 10 years. Then we were able to do in 06, some really talented players in 06 that we had when we inherited some really good players here. But trying to get them to play in a way that made sense for the whole of the group. Yeah, you've evolved that for sure. But year to year, I like to think, as we can pick more players that we have choices of. You can sort of say, well, this is the right kind of player that we want to play as a center back, and this is the right kind of player we want to play as a forward. And you still have to come in and make them do it, but you have more opportunity in a lot of ways to continue to fit the mold of what you like. And so our teams are pretty consistent, I would say, over the last maybe 10 years. Stylistically, there's a lot of similarities to them. Now our shape has changed a little bit, and some things have changed, but in general, there's I think it'd feel very familiar.
What made the 2019 team so special? When teams win a championship, there's a lot of reasons why it happens. Things come together. Sometimes you win the penalties, and another year you may have lost the penalties. But what made that year so special, and why was that the year you won the title?
I mean, there's a lot of elements to go into it when you have a season like that. There's a lot of things that go right. You need some luck, no question. But you have to first look at who your old guys are, your seniors, right? And we had some very good, talented seniors, but we also had some seniors who were very much behind the scenes that didn't play a lot, that did a remarkable job being old and knowing their jobs. And I mean, what a credit to that group, because when they came in as freshmen, they were not in a spot. I was worried about them as seniors when they were freshmen. I was like, boy, they're immature. They don't get it. They're kind of selfish with their playing and this and that and the other. And boy, they grew up in a way that was wonderful to see them as seniors lead a team of guys on a season where I think we just lost once over a really hard run of games. and that's 100% attributed to the fact that that group of seniors, whether they played a lot or didn't play at all or anywhere in between, did just a remarkable job leading the group. Training was awfully fun, but we just had a lot of good players. So yeah, that helps, right? We had a lot of good players, and there were games where our starting group, and that group got very used to sharing minutes, right? We had All-Americans who were happy coming off for somebody to come on and give a stretch, because they really respected each other, but they also respected the quality of who was coming on for them. And the guys who didn't start were, accepted their role really well to come on. The guys who did start accepted their role to come off. And so those kinds of things just sort of fell into place. But the culture of that was really set by the old guys, and without their sort of buy-in to those things, and that the juniors and the seniors were really good with that. But we had plenty of games where our starting group was just okay to start the game off. Very talented group of players. But we, there's two games in particular, one at UCLA early in the year, and then the Big East final against Providence at the end of the year, where the start of the games weren't great. We went down to UCLA within like 3 minutes, and we were playing fine, but it was 1-0. And then we made 3 or 4 subs halfway through the first half, and that group of players ran over UCLA, and, it was 2-1 at halftime for us. And then it went to 5, we won 5-1. And, without quality coming in, that team probably doesn't win that game. And then the Big East final, same thing. We went down 1-0 against a really good Providence team, and our reserves were the ones who won the game. Like, they were the ones who made all the plays to get the goal back, to go ahead. They started the second half. We kept them on for the second half. They were great. So that kind of depth. And I think the one thing that I give our coaching staff credit for that year is that we trusted our depth. We never sort of said, oh, okay, this game's important, so we're going to go with this group of starters longer or whatever. We trusted the guys coming off the bench. And we maintained that sort of faith in the whole of the group for the entire season. And I think that was a huge part of that team.
Well, that's wonderful. I remember those days. It was, whenever you have a national champion in the DC area, it's really celebrated, because we just don't get that many. We had the Capitals and we had the Nationals. We had one little good patch, and we had Georgetown soccer.
Yeah, it was a good time, right? We had a lot of things going on that era.
Yeah, there was a long drought before that, and all of a sudden things were going our way. Well, you were talking about earlier the graduate students that are in the game. So you got some old players that are in the game, and this year was interesting for you guys because your 2 leading scorers were freshmen. So in a time of college soccer, where you have some older players, you got great production of Jacob Morrell, Jack Penayato, I might not pronounce that right, but 2 freshmen. You had a super sub, Marlon Tabora, who came off the bench and had 7 assists. Going into the season, being so young, what were your expectations? I know you got off to a kind of a sluggish start, but by the end of the year, you guys had won probably, I think, 10 of 14 games in a row or something like that. So tell us about your team and the 2022 season.
Yeah, it was a hard year because the expectations are you win regardless of who's on the field. And I think we started the year slow. We were 1-4-2 after 7 games, which was a hard run. I think, again, you give a lot of credit to the seniors. We didn't have a lot of seniors in the group because they never sort of lost their way. They were very steady with how they led even in that period of time. And then we went on a run where we didn't lose for like 11, 12 games. Right. And that's a real credit to that group, but we were young. Yeah. We leaned on our freshmen a lot more than we would like to have. But we had some departures to the pro ranks, which we expected. Dante Polvara won the National Player of the Year. He was his junior. He went to Aberdeen in the Scottish Premier League, which, we were projecting he was likely going to have a really good pro opportunity that he needed to take. But, from our point of view, it was good. He was going to graduate. He's graduating. Will Sands left for Columbus the same a year early. Stefan Stojanovic left a year early for Philly. And so, we should have felt in some ways like an older team. And because those players left to take pro opportunities, we suddenly felt very young. And I think the goal for us, because we don't really dip into the grad school sort of 1-year transfer, we haven't really gone international, which international players tend to be older when they come into the college game. And so, we're very much a group of 18, 19-year-old kids running around playing against 24, 25-year-old men. And that was, that's a challenge to get through, but I thought the guys handled it really, really wonderfully. And yeah, we were young this year. And so for them to figure that out and have a good year, win the Big East regular season and get to the NCAA tournament and was, I think, a real success for the group. And I think the goal for us as coaches is to get the players who want to be in college, who want to develop through it, and then be old every year, right? Feel old every year. And in order to do that, you have to have guys that come and stay and work and are good and stay through juniors and senior years, so that every year, your freshmen have a hard time getting onto the field. So this year it was an anomaly. We weren't able to do that. But that's the aim is can we be a year older next year? We only lose. We have 2 field players from the team last year that we will move on, and so there's much more experience returning. Now the 2 players we lose are midfielder of the year Aiden Roach and defender of the year for the Big East Daniel Wu. Big losses, so we have to fill those. But there's just more guys who have some experience under the belt coming back, which will be helpful for 2023.
Yeah. Well, Coach, this has been great. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. I did want to ask one question, and it's slightly political, but when I read your profile, it was fascinating. You spent 1 year playing soccer in Zimbabwe, and you were there during the time of Robert Mugabe, and I guess AIDS had gotten really bad in Zimbabwe and Africa, Southern Africa generally about that time. What was that year like? It must have been kind of unique for this white American goalie's playing goalie for a former colony.
Yeah.
British colony. Yeah.
Well, it wasn't a full year. It was about maybe 4 months we were there. I was there. I knew I was only going to be there for 4 months as well. So I actually went with a teammate of mine who stayed for a full year. He was like, he wanted to stay and play along. So he was going to stay for at least a year if he could, and if he can. But yeah, it was a very formative period of time for me to play there. I mean, it's a soccer crazy country, right? So, you're very, we pop over, and we were really well looked after. I mean, I think because you're coming over to play soccer and you're in I played with the Bulawayo Highlanders, and it was for a young player, it was remarkable, right? Because you're playing in front of 20,000, 25,000 people, 30,000 people. And yeah, you were the only big dopey white guy on the field, right? I'm in goals, and I'm 6'3", and I'm wearing uniforms that are designed for probably a 5'10" goalkeeper, right? But you walk around town and everyone knows who you are, right? And so there was I was maybe too young to feel that kind of pressure. I definitely felt it, but there was real pressure to play well and win. And it was really interesting, that the town, because the economy wasn't good, right? Mugabe was making a mess of things. A US dollar would go a really long way. I was acutely aware of the fact that, when I played, the way that the club was situated at that time was if you played, you got wages. And I always was like, well, I don't want to get paid. Can you give it to the other goalies? Which the club was like, oh, cool. Yeah, we'll do that. Of course. And I'm guarantee you they never gave it to the other goalies. We're quite happy to pocket whatever that would have been. But I was acutely aware of the fact that when I played, one of the other members of the team wasn't, right. And it was really important. I mean, that was a significant thing for them. But it was, it's Rhodesia, right? It was Rhodesia. But it had sort of transformed into an independent country, but you could still see Bulawayo had a very European English feeling town presence. Downtown would feel kind of like a downtown in anywhere. And then as you spread out into the suburbs, it became very much more sort of what you would think of rural African, sort of very humble townships, right outside of the town. And so you had very affluent, white suburbs, and a downtown that was struggling to sort of exist and have functional shops and all that. And then, it was it was an unbelievably beautiful country. I felt very safe, and obviously I think my status as a player probably helped that too, but just wonderfully happy people. And it was sort of an interesting time because I think the people were struggling, but you never felt like they were struggling, right? When you walked around, you never really, you never felt that, but you knew, jobs were hard to come by, and the dollar, the Zim dollar didn't buy you that much. Inflation was starting to really hit. It hadn't gone crazy yet. It was starting to go crazy. And so like you're there as a 21-year-old or whatever I was at that time, and you're playing soccer and you're doing the stuff and you're having a great time. And I was volunteers teaching math in a high school equivalency. I helped set up like a chess team at a middle school. I was like just trying to fill my time before in and around practice, in and around it. But you're in this community of people that that were there was definitely a feeling of a change of, right. It was all economic. Everything was very economic. It was like, what's going to happen? Who's going to work? Where do you work? How do you get what does the dollar buy you? Right. So we talk about inflation in the US right now, like when you see it really get bad, it's a scary thing to see for a country and a city you have to deal with.
Well, that's a great story, Coach. I'm glad you're willing to talk about it. But yeah, I loved your views of the game, and it's obvious why you're so successful. And also hearing about your great coaches that you learned from, and also the players that helped you be so successful. But anyway, congratulations on another great year, and I look forward to following the Hoyas next year, and maybe one of these days we can even meet in person.
I love that, Julian, right? Like we get the Zoom stuff. That's easy, but you're going to have to come to a game. So
I will.
I'll get you a ticket if you give me some warning. I'll get you on the gate list. No problem.
Oh, that'd be great. I appreciate that, Coach. Anyway, look, have a wonderful off season. Enjoy the World Cup. Are you Morocco or France today?
It's hard, right? You kind of like the story of an African country getting there, right? Which would be nice. France is pretty good though. It's gonna be hard for them. It's gonna be hard for them.
Should be a great game though.
It would, it will be. I think it will be today. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, again, Coach, I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for having me on, Julie. Nice to see you.